Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the podcast, episode 067. Is that right?
No, we're 68.
It's number 68, podcast 68, everybody.
And what's the podcast they're listening to?
This is Coco and Daltz.
I'm not Daltz.
And I'm not Coco. And what we do here is we review movies. So our motto is real people, real reviews. And there's lots of E's in that real reviews. We're not going to tell you where they are, but you have to figure it out for yourself.
You could go to our Facebook page or our Twitter page or our website or any of our podcast platforms and look it up if you're interested.
You could. So what are we talking about this week, Coco?
So what we are reviewing today is the final Star Wars trilogy, the Disney trilogy, the sequel trilogy, episodes 7, 8, and 9.
What's the official name for this? Is it the sequel trilogy or is it the Disney trilogy?
I think they're interchangeable.
Okay.
I don't think anybody cares because it blew. So there we go.
It's blue? Really?
That's all you need to know. Thank you for listening.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.
So it's episode 7, 8, and 9, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker. And we actually did 2 other episodes of the podcast reviewing the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. Mm-hmm. We were planning on doing them all 3 together, but the sequel trilogy sucks so bad that we did something else before we did this.
Really?
So they're not in order.
Oh, yes.
So,
not in order in terms of sequential of the podcast.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So
we needed a break is what we needed. I specifically, I needed a break because if I saw another lightsaber, I was going to, lose it, I think.
Yeah, Daltz is not the world's biggest Star Wars fan. He just placates me by watching all the bad stuff that I like to watch. And this was bad.
Well, it's valuable relationship points, people. Like, you could learn a lot from this situation.
That's true. So the Disney trilogy is... I'm not really sure how to summarize it because it was just kind of all over the place. There wasn't really...
Give me the elevator pitch.
Yeah, there wasn't really one through line for the whole trilogy.
Which there should be.
The original trilogy was good versus evil. Luke Skywalker is battling evil. He's battling his father. And the prequel trilogy was how Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader.
Became evil, yeah.
And this trilogy, at best... all 3 movies kind of have one girl's journey to becoming a Jedi Master. That's really kind of the only thing that ties all 3 of them together. Because it was pretty messy.
The first one was called The Force Awakens.
Yes, it was released, I believe, in 2015.
And so, to me, when we went to see that... No, we didn't go to see that.
We did not go see that.
But we saw it
together. We watched it together.
And when I saw that, when I watched it with you was the first time I saw it. So... to me, I remember my reaction was, this is the original movie. This is the original Star Wars remade, only the hero is now a heroine. And Daisy Ridley, I think her name is now Mark Hamill. Mm-hmm. They're playing the parts. And then we've got a bunch of other guys who are similar. So Oscar Isaac is playing the Han Solo character in terms of the wisecracker, but he's a member of the Republic or
the Resistance.
The Resistance, thank you. But he's still like the smart ass guy. And then you've got R2D2 and C3PO are in this too. You've got other various factions, but so that one to me represented sort of like, this was Disney's big blowout, right? They're like, okay, they had made Rogue One and they had done some other stuff, but this was like the big, okay, this is the first one of the new trilogy. Look how awesome we are. This is going to be great. And it was the same movie to me as the original Star Wars.
And the fact that it's exactly the same as A New Hope is probably why it's the best movie of the Disney trilogy.
Yeah, right.
Because it's really hard to mess up A New Hope.
Yeah.
I had very high hopes for this trilogy after watching The Force Awakens because, yes, I understand it's a complete ripoff, but the dialogue was witty. I thought all of the characters had good chemistry with each other.
The acting was pretty good.
Yep. You have Han Solo and Leia and Luke returning at the very end.
Right. But they're in it.
Han and Leia are in it. It's really good to see them. It's
Chewie.
Good. Chewie's in it. C-3PO and R2, like you said, were in it. Adam Driver as the villain, sort of like the Vader counterpart, because he's Vader's grandson, because he's Han and Leia's son. So I was very optimistic about the Disney trilogy after seeing this, because even though it's a ripoff, it was an extremely well done ripoff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could overlook the fact that it wasn't original because it was so well done.
You liked it a lot better than I did, that's for sure. And it was, I think it's because you're more of a fan of the canon than I am. I was looking at it from a purely like, not necessarily a newbie, because I had seen all the original movies, the original trilogy movies, and I was a big fan of Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, as listener will attest after having listened to the sequential podcast that we've done on it. But I was coming at it sort of like having, at that point when we watched it, I had skipped the prequel trilogy. So I was coming into this thinking, all right, Star Wars is back. Let's do it. Let's do some fun stuff, and it's going to be new. And no, it was the same movie. So I think I was coming at it more like the general public, the general populace.
Daltz is a bitter, jaded Gen Xer.
Right.
Like when
It's like, don't rip off my culture, these watershed moments from my youth, and then just pass it off as new and creative. Like, how can you possibly do that, J.J. Abrams?
Oh, we'll talk about JJ.
Okay.
We're going to talk more about JJ.
Right. Dynamite.
Exactly.
So, but you liked it though, Coco.
I did. I really enjoyed it for all the reasons I just listed. It was extremely well done. And then The Last Jedi came out.
So that's the next one of the trilogy.
Right. That's episode 8.
Episode 8, if you're following along on your scorecard at home.
And nothing happened in The Last Jedi. Like, it was just 2.5 hours of nothing.
Yeah, it was a long nothing, yeah.
This trilogy suffered from the fact, like I said off the top, that there was no plan in place. There wasn't one person who had kind of oversight and...
Like George Lucas.
Right, like in the first 2 trilogies, George Lucas, even if he didn't write Return of the Jedi, it was still based on his story, and he still consulted on it. So, you still had like the commonalities and the cohesiveness, but with this...
And the vision, the overall vision that he had.
Exactly, but with this trilogy, you have J.J. Abrams writing episode 7 and then handing it off. Like, he sets up like a lot of storylines that Rian Johnson didn't necessarily take in directions that I enjoyed in The Last Jedi. And there were a lot of things. When we saw The Last Jedi in the theater, I freaking hated it. I hated it so much. Like, it was awful. And we went back and we watched it on Disney Plus in anticipation of doing this podcast.
As research.
And I didn't dislike it as much watching it the second time, but I'm not sure if that's because I knew it was going to be terrible, so my expectations were lowered, or if it's just on second viewing, it was just a smidge better. Like, I don't hate that Rian Johnson just tried to blow up a lot of things and be really subversive, but first of all, I don't think this is the franchise that you can do that in. Like, I think in maybe more of like a Marvel franchise, you can get away with that, or something that's not as beloved as this particular franchise. But
and also, don't try to set your own mark. Like, don't try to put your own footprint on this particular franchise, because it's the ship has already sailed. Right. Like, work within the parameters of what you've got, and don't try to break out. Right.
Like, when even Mark Hamill is like, yeah, Luke's storyline was crap. Like, and then he kind of reined it in a little bit because Disney, came down hard on him.
Yelled at him, yeah.
But
come on, Luke.
I mean, yeah, there was so much in this movie. It was visually stunning, but just a lot of the storylines just fell flat. Like, and I know people who have seen this movie, we don't need to rehash everything, but obviously the storyline, like the subplot where they go to the casino planet, was stupid and pointless. The Benicio del Toro character was stupid and pointless. Like, they killed off Captain Phasma, who could have been like a great, number 2 villain behind Kylo Ren. Like, she didn't have anything to do. Leia was completely sidelined, and I realized that nobody could know that Carrie Fisher was going to die before episode 9 filmed, but you don't need Holdo as a strong female admiral character because you have Leia.
Laura Dern played her.
Right. Like, you don't need Laura Dern because you have a strong female.
Yeah, that didn't feel right.
Like, resistance character in Carrie Fisher. She could have done so much more. And
she's got resistance chops already.
Right. Like, instead she's just in sickbay for the whole movie. And they kill off Admiral Akbar when, they injured Leia. well, if you're going to have a character who's not Leia in command, it could have been Admiral Akbar because he already had a backstory and there was already a connection with the audience.
And we were familiar with him,
And we were familiar with him. So when Holdo did light speed through Snoke's ship, that was a really visually stunning moment in the movie, and it was really kind of awesome, actually, except I didn't give a crap that her character sacrificed herself so the rest of the resistance could get away because I had no connection to that character because I'd only known her for 45 minutes. Whereas if it's Admiral Akbar, we've known him since the original trilogy. So that would be a much more moving sacrifice.
If you're going to kill him in that way rather than just like a blowout of the deck or what happened to him.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't even know if we saw him in that movie.
No.
And then they were like, oh yeah, Admiral Akbar, is dead. And I was like, what?
Maybe the actor who played Admiral Akbar was asking for too much.
Probably.
To star in the second movie, and they just wrote him out of it.
He did a Harrison Ford, I'll only do it for $50 million, and if you kill my character off, so I never have to do this ever again.
So it's like a Dukes of Hazzard situation where they totally. We're going to bring in a different set of Dukes.
Right, where it's Coy and Vance for the one season when Bo and Luke are holding out, right? There you go, people. We got.
How old are we?
I know, totally. So there, and I mean,
you're worked up about this. I can tell.
There's so much
there's steam coming out of your ears.
Wrong with this movie, and like I said, I don't mind that he tried to be subversive.
Yeah.
I just don't think that this is the franchise that you should be doing that
with.
Well,
Rian Johnson is a talented guy. He's done some very good movies.
He did Knives Out.
The one we most recently saw was Knives Out, which was a very creative and well done and well directed movie. He'd done other movies in the past that were pretty good.
Was it Looper? I think that's another one
Looper was also one of his. And so I think Looper was what got him this gig with Disney because he showed he could do pseudo science fiction. He showed he had the chops to do a sort of science fiction approach with Looper. Obviously, Star Wars series being more science fiction. But I think you're right. Is I think that there was just a lack of cohesion. Like the one thing that the first two trilogies had, failings aside, was they had a consistent voice.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you've mentioned that in various ways too, and I completely agree because you brought that analysis that I did not see, but now I see it clearly. And that's not just relationship points talking here. This is actually, this is insight. And you can see that George Lucas did the first movie, the New Hope, first Star Wars. He wrote, directed that one. Same thing with the Jar Jar Binks debacle. But in each one of those trilogies, those first two trilogies, story was by George Lucas. Mm-hmm. And so there was the foundation to build from. There were the characters that he had in mind. He had certain arcs in mind for each one of these characters over those three movies, each one of those three movies. You just didn't have a sense for that in this trilogy. You had very much what it was a bookend by one director and then a middle movie by another director. And that's exactly what it felt like to me. And it's so difficult, like I said in a previous podcast, is that to do that middle movie without making it feel like it's a filler movie. Like we need to get to the last chapter of the story, so we need a middle movie. It's sort of like the middle act of a movie, right, or a play. Is it the first act that you're setting it up and you're introducing the characters and you're introducing the conflict. The second act is sort of like dealing a little bit with the conflict, and then the third act is the resolution of the conflict, I should say. So it was almost like an extrapolation of that in this trilogy, is that middle movie was just like, is this even part of the series? Like you could almost watch the first one and the third one,
right,
and not really miss much in the second, not having watched the second one.
Yeah.
So that's a bad sign with a trilogy. You want to be leading people to the next step, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I absolutely agree that there was no thread through the whole. Yeah. Even though there were threads, there were characters and there were similar elements. But when you get down to it, it was like, if you're watching 2.5 hours on this stuff,
right,
like, are you really going to commit to that second movie? So in the same vein with the prequel trilogy, and we talking trash about A Phantom Menace, it's like, you don't need to watch that movie.
No.
So in the three trilogies we're talking about here, you watch the first three movies in the original trilogy. Maybe you bail when the angry teddy bears come on near the end.
You're bitter about the Ewoks.
The Ewoks, man, they just I don't know. It's like Muppet Show galore or whatever. But anyway, so pretty much those three movies, they hold together really well. Mm-hmm. But then the prequel trilogy, you don't need to watch that first one. And then the Disney trilogy, if you're going to watch the entire thing, you don't really need to watch that middle one. I mean, it just you're not missing much really,
Yeah.
because they rehash a lot of the stuff in the third one that you might have missed in the second one.
Yeah, like really, I think the only thing right off the top of my head I can think of that's a major plot development that you miss if you don't watch the second movie is that Snoke dies.
Right.
Like
but you can kind of figure that out because there's a new villain in the third one.
There's a new villain in the third one who had not remotely been alluded to at all in the first two movies. Suddenly he just shows up in the crawl that he's back because Disney came down all over J.J. Abrams and said, you have to fix what Rian Johnson effed up because the fanboys are pissed.
Right.
And so...
And by the way, Snoke was a lot like Palpatine.
Yeah.
He was Palpatine-esque, so there wasn't really much difference there. So if you're going to do that, so here's where the thread part, here's where the through line comes in, is if you have J.J. Abrams writing all three of them, let's say.
Which... I don't really know if that trilogy would have been a whole lot better if he had been writing it because he's a hack and his mystery boxes are...
So my point is the same person writing the first three episodes, whether it's J.J. Abrams or
if Rian Johnson
or Ron Howard or whoever happens to be.
You know what? I'll take Ron Howard at this point. Like
Mr. Solo, a Star Wars story.
I mean, you know that the Ewoks would have returned if Ron Howard had.
So if you have that, at least you've got that commonality. You've got that thread all the way through it. And so therefore, you would have had some sort of Palpatine introduction in the first one. And then it would have gone all the way through to its logical conclusion, rather than this random new guy who doesn't really have a backstory shows up and he's a villain. And then, oh, by the way, Palpatine shows up in the third movie. So like it was just too jarring. It was like, it wasn't a trilogy to me. It was like three separate movies made with the same characters.
It totally was. And before we move completely on to The Rise of Skywalker, I just will say I'm dumping all over Rian Johnson a lot here. I will, however, not dump on him for that whole thing where Kylo Ren tells Rey, you're nobody, your parents were just drunks and they sold you for drinking money. Like, a lot of people were really outraged by that because Rey is supposed to be a Skywalker or a Kenobi, or in the end, it turns out she's a Palpatine. Like, she's supposed to have some kind of blood of some family.
The Force in her.
Yeah, that we've already been introduced to. So a lot of fans were incredibly upset about Kylo Ren telling her she's a nobody, and then J.J. Abrams having to retcon that in the third movie and be like, oh no, just kidding, I lied, you're actually a Palpatine. And
it was all a dream.
But, that didn't surprise me because villains have been known to lie. So when...
Or manipulate, yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So when, I heard that whole, like, you were nobody, your parents were drunks, I was like, this is going to totally get explained away in the third movie because
that's
villains lie, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if Kylo Ren were trying to get, like, some kind of psychological edge on Rey by making her think that she's, nobody and she's not any kind of noble blood or whatever. So a lot of fans were really, really pissed off about that. I didn't really care. I'm like, whatever. It's going to be explained away. So, and it was.
And it was.
Because The Rise of Skywalker was retconning. It was 2.5 hours of retconning.
It was. There was a lot of damage control, it seemed like.
Totally.
And it was a lot of... See, this series, now, in fairness, this trilogy takes place in the age of social media at its height.
Right.
I mean, to this point in history. And so the prequel trilogy did not have that. Social media was a thing, but it wasn't nearly as...
Well, the internet was a thing.
The internet was a thing.
Like, what was maybe MySpace was maybe a thing in, like, 1999?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah, I mean, the internet's been around since the early to mid-90s, right? But in terms of social media, like, it wasn't really... Where I'm going with that is it wasn't really a factor. So the feedback that they're getting on that series, on that trilogy, was mainly critics and maybe fanboys and that sort of thing. So
and like AOL chat rooms or something.
Right. And so they're reacting to, like, the Jar Jar Binks thing was clearly a reaction. So they scaled him back. They listened, but they didn't have the near volume of feedback that the Disney trilogy did. So the Disney trilogy has got all these, everybody's tweeting at the Disney trilogy like, this is trash, this is garbage. And so, like, it's piling up. The vitriol is piling up. So they had to react somehow. But you can tell because the first movie had this, and then the second movie didn't have so much of that. And then the third movie was this, so it was a very reactionary trilogy to me, as opposed to the first two that seemed to be like, we got this vision, we're going to go through with it.
And I will say I'm now dumping all over J.J. Abrams as well, but the first movie, like Dalt said, that's a setup. Like, that sets up the next two movies. So I didn't mind the mystery boxes that he set up in the first movie because that's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
And if Rian Johnson had done a competent job of answering any of those questions in the second movie, the third movie probably wouldn't have turned out the way it turned out. But instead, the original director of the third movie gets fired, and then, Disney, like, jams JJ in there and is like, you have to deal with this now because the second movie was trash. Even though the critics freaking loved the second movie, the fans were just horrified by it, as I understand, because
as
I was
you
one.
Were. Yeah.
So the third movie was just, it wasn't as terrible as the second movie, but it was, I went into it with very low expectations, and they were, I was like, okay, yeah, this was fine, whatever. I wasn't blown away. I wasn't pissed off. I was just like, okay, whatever, this is done. I never have to revisit this, which we then did because now we're doing this podcast, but like, I never have to rewatch like the second or third movies from this trilogy.
Well, it's funny because I'm sort of crapping all over the Disney trilogy. But I didn't dislike it as much as you did. I still thought it was relatively entertaining. I liked Adam Driver as I want to say Darth Vader, but he was Kylo Ren. Like, he was a conflicted guy, and Adam Driver at the time when he first took this role was not the Adam Driver we know now. So this was his time to shine, and he really did a great job in terms of putting his own mark on that character. That character was much more wishy-washy than Darth Vader ever was.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And so that was a little bit disconcerting to me because when you look at you want to focus on a bad guy villain who has all his stuff together and has he wants to conquer the world, or he wants to be the emperor of all time, or there's a certain goal in mind. He didn't have that. And other than like, yes, your majesty, or whatever that he was talking to Palpatine about, like, he didn't seem like he was focused.
Yeah.
And maybe that was part of the intention because he was dealing with all the conflict inside him about his dad was Han Solo and his mom is Princess Leia and all this sort of stuff. So there was the way that part was written, I didn't think it really was cohesive. However, I thought that he did a really good job with what he had. I really liked Daisy Ridley. I thought she was really good. The other characters I thought were and the other actors were kind of parodies or like a little bit more one dimensional than in the other trilogies, but they were still fine. I mean, the John Boyega character, there was a lot of room there for him to do something because he was a former stormtrooper. So we had never seen any kind of insight into the life of a stormtrooper, at least in the trilogies. I know we had in some of the other, like, Clone Wars and like the smaller things, the side projects and stuff like that, but not the main movies. And I thought that was a really fascinating thing. Like I've said in the past, is like when we watched this Disney trilogy for the first time, that was the first time I realized that stormtroopers, there was actually people in there. I thought they were robots.
Yeah.
Like I thought they were just like
battle droids or something.
Right. Like I thought they were just fake. That would explain why they're such terrible shots and why they're, they're getting slaughtered by the hundreds in every scene is because they're just robots and who cares. But I thought that was a storyline that should have been explored more rather than him being, I need to save my own skin, and like it seemed like he was running away all the time and then he came back.
Apparently, the original director for The Rise of Skywalker, his script had that character leading a stormtrooper insurrection.
Oh, yeah?
In that movie.
See, now that's interesting to me.
Yeah, and then that guy got fired. And
do we know that guy's name?
Colin Trevorrow?
Oh, yeah,
something
okay.
like that. Yeah. So, so between John Boyega and Adam Driver, when we were watching this trilogy, here at home, the biggest word that just kept repeating in my mind over and over again was just waste.
Yes.
This trilogy was such a waste of all of the talent.
The potential.
Because Adam Driver got hired when he was just right on the upswing of his career, really taking off. He's an excellent actor. Like, he brought so much depth to that character. Like, I said this in the prequel trilogy episode, but like, look at Hayden Christensen basically playing Kylo Ren, and then look at Adam Wren playing that same character, and like Adam Driver, sorry, and like there's no contest. Like Adam Driver just blows Hayden Christensen out of the water.
Yeah.
So you have lost Adam Driver. Like,
because you're misusing him.
Because you're misusing him. Like John Boyega, I've never seen him in anything else, but I've read excellent reviews of stuff he has been in. He could have done so much more.
Yeah, and
he didn't.
My criticism of him is not on his ability.
Right, exactly.
It's just sort of like, where were they going with this guy?
Yeah,
like, I was confused as to, is he going to help? Like, it seemed like he was just, it was so predictable to me. He's like, I'm out of here. And then he would come back. And then I'm out of here. And then he would come back and save the day. It was like, well.
Yeah, he just screamed Ray a lot in the third movie. That was like all he had to do.
Right,
like you had, at least for the first two movies, you had Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, and Mark Hamill all alive, all willing to come back.
Mm-hmm.
You wasted, Harrison Ford got a really good story in the first movie. I'm not upset about him. Right. But you completely wasted Carrie Fisher.
Right.
You completely wasted Mark Hamill on like a dumb, out of character storyline for Luke. The guy who played Palpatine in both of the first two trilogies was miraculously still alive. He should not have come back for this trilogy because that's total BS. But if you're going to bring him back, he's alive. Like,
it just seemed like lazy script writing to me to bring back Palpatine. Like,
yeah, totally. But like you had all the ingredients.
Yep.
Like, so much more could have been done, but it was just such a waste because everything balls were dropped all over the place with this trilogy, between not allowing the actors to have good storylines, like not having good scripts, like everything just sucked.
And I think that comes down to, and I know I've said this before, but it's like the creativity by committee, is that Disney was in there in every meeting, probably, every script meeting, every viewing of the dailies.
Right.
Like, they were all over this, whereas they didn't have that, the Star Wars crew did not have that pressure in the first two trilogies.
Well, and this is, and I also want to say, and Lando, Billy D is alive.
Right.
But you basically waste him in the third movie by giving a major storyline to Kerry Russell, who I love Kerry Russell because she was in Felicity, which is a J.J. Abrams project from the 90s, which is actually good.
Wow, throwback.
But you don't need her character if you have somebody who already knows like all the shady characters in the universe, and he can take you to Babu Frick.
And
like,
a very likable character too.
Right, exactly. So, but anyways, so sorry to get off on a tangent there. But so Disney loved The Last Jedi. Like, they freaking loved it, and they were stunned when the fan reaction was awful. And J.J. Abrams, I believe, it could have been him, it might have been Kathleen Kennedy, but I believe it was J.J. Abrams came out and was just like, oh yeah, Ryan did this thing, and we're not really too sure about it, but that's crap. This is not the Blair Witch Project. This isn't people going out in the woods with like a handheld, cam.
And coming back with a final product. Like, exactly like Dalt said, like, Disney was like watching the dailies, and they were signing off on everything, and so. And you can tell.
Yeah.
You can tell. I mean, the stuff that Disney does well it's the special effects were really good.
Right.
The likable merchandising characters.
I didn't mind the porgs. I know a lot of people hated the porgs.
Yeah,
I didn't mind the porgs.
I wasn't a big fan of them, but those were there. And so there was like, we need to get this cutesy element in here to entice the littler kids in so they'll grow up to be Star Wars fans. And so like there was all those things that were done well because Disney does that well. But to me, it was not the adult factor of this story.
Well, and I've heard the argument that ultimately Star Wars movies are for kids. And
Absolutely.
kids are gonna like these movies because you've got BB-8, you've got the Porgs, you've got Babu Frick. Like, kids aren't really gonna care about the storylines too much.
Right. It's
so
the effects and the characters, yeah.
Right. So this is just like a bunch of overgrown Arrested Development people belly aching about, this is not my, trilogy,
right. But every parent who has ever gone to see Frozen or The Incredibles or Inside Out or any of those movies that were really successful, they were successful because they were good on two levels, right? They were good for the kids. The kids got an enjoyment out of the special effects and the laughs and the characters and the oh my gosh factor. And the adults got another example of that is Cars. One of the greatest animated movies by Pixar is it's so good on so many levels because it's about just these talking cars, which the kids will find entertaining. It's about Tow Mater, who does a lot of fart jokes. And then there's there's all these other things. But then there's the other level for the adults, and the adults are like, yeah, this is about alienation. This is about forgetting your hometown. This is about more than that. And so that's what the successful movies across the board, like E.T. is another one, another classic one, where it was about being alienated, not to be literal about it, and also to be, losing touch with where you're from and all that sort of stuff. I think that's what this particular trilogy lacked. It was more about just. It was just trying to be too many things rather than be two simple stories. The simple story for the kids and the simple story for the adults. And it didn't have that. It was just all meshed together.
I mean, if you're going to rip off A New Hope and The Force Awakens, why don't you just rip off The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi for the next two movies and just make a few changes here and there, because that's a successful formula.
And I think I might even said that when we reviewed, when we first saw The Last Jedi, I think it was. It's like, well, I was expecting the next movie in the trilogy because The Force Awakens was Star Wars. I was expecting The Last Jedi to be The Empire Strikes Back-esque, and it was not. And then I was expecting, in turn, the Rise of Skywalker to be Return of the Jedi. And exactly, you're right. I mean, if they had held to at least some of the framework of that story, it would have been a lot more. It would have been a lot more consistent, and there would have been a through line. It's just, again, where I'm harping on the same thing, but it just didn't feel like a cohesive.
No.
Like you should be able to watch a trilogy theoretically, one after the other, like in the same sitting, like we did, and feel like you're watching the same movie theoretically, right? Like one big long movie. And I didn't get that sense at all from the Disney trilogy. It was like, this is 3 movies.
And that's the thing I don't understand about Disney, is that they also did the Marvel movies, and they had
so well.
Yeah, those were so well done, and they had like one guy who was kind of shepherding everything, like just overseeing that. And that was a massive freaking franchise. That was what, like 22, 23 movies over
and all
like
the characters
10 years, and you've got to have continuity, and you've got to so I don't
and that's even, I would argue that's more pressure, because you've got characters that exist already,
right?
Like you've got comic book characters that people have a huge following for and liking for, whereas Star Wars, you have the basic characters, but the idea is that you can make up new characters and you have a blank slate every time. You didn't have that with Marvel, so there's a lot of pressure there.
And when George Lucas sold the franchise to Disney, he had outlines for these 3 movies that he was like, hey, you want to see these? And they were like, nah, man, we're good. And I'm like, I've read a little bit about what could have been in them, and I'm like, well, maybe that part might have not been so great. But it's like, when the guy who masterminded the franchise that you were buying for just bucket loads of money, when he says, these are my ideas for like the final trilogy, like, why don't you look at those?
Right.
Instead of like throwing them out and letting J.J. Abrams like go wild.
Do whatever he wants to do.
Yeah, with his mystery boxes, and then his fan service in the final movie, which if it had been done well, I would have been all over it. Like when Luke raised the X-Wing out of the water on whatever Irish island he was on, like if that had been like done well, I would have been like, oh my God, it's just like when Yoda raised it out of Dagobah. But because at that point I was just like so tired of everything and I wanted it to be over, I was like, oh look, he's ripping off Yoda doing this on Dagobah,
Total obvi.
Right. So there was just so much, because they were feeling the pressure, to please the fans. So, there was just so much crammed in there, and it was just not awesome. It was the whole trilogy was just a waste. It was just disappointing and a waste.
So maybe there's a case here for Jon Favreau to be the new showrunner for the next trilogy, if there's going to be one. I mean, do we know what's happening next?
Well, allegedly, Ryan Johnson and the guys who did Game of Thrones, I think, were both supposed to do like Skywalker saga Star Wars trilogies.
Like one-off? Oh, trilogies, okay.
Yeah, but I know the Game of Thrones guys, like their stuff got put on hold after the final season of Game of Thrones. Like people hated it. And I believe the Ryan Johnson trilogy might be on hold as well, but I could be wrong.
So they were separate
that.
trilogies.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. I think Disney is backing off because Disney has had a really bad experience releasing Star Wars movies, aside from The Force Awakens and Rogue One. Like, I think they've backed off on the movies and they're focusing everything on Disney Plus, which I will say, because The Mandalorian is so well done, because you've got Favreau.
And that's where I was going with the Favreau, for people who don't know, is that he's the showrunner on the Mandalorian series.
Yeah, so I know that they plan on doing a series for Obi-Wan with Ewan McGregor, which was supposed to be a movie, and then when Solo laid an egg, they were like, maybe we'll do a series instead. And there's also supposed to be a series about Cassian Andor, who was played by Diego Luna in Rogue One, his character, which I'm going to watch the hell out of the Obi-Wan and Cassian Andor series. Like, sorry to...
Well, Rogue One was good, right? I mean,
Rogue One was. So this is another thing about the Disney Star Wars films is that they have all had very troubled productions, but Rogue One and The Force Awakens being the first two that were released, like the end product was like so excellent for both of them that like, you know, it kind of disguised the fact that there was chaos behind the scenes.
even those two had chaos.
Yeah, those two might have actually been the most chaotic. Like, I think on Rogue One, the director was, like, replaced midway through filming. And
By Ron Howard.
Not by Ron Howard. And then...
I'm just going to insert his name everywhere because he took over for the Solo movie.
Actually, the same thing might have happened on the... No, I don't think this... I don't know. I don't remember what happened on The Force Awakens. But yeah, then, like, on Solo, like, the kid who played Han Solo needed, like, acting lessons. And that's the movie that Ron Howard took over
Right.
midway through. Like,
Well, and so
yeah.
I know we talked about this when we reviewed that, but it's like that's an alarm. Not only that he needed acting lessons, but also that got out.
Right, totally.
Like, you think that if they're protecting their interest and their investment in any way, shape, or form, they're not letting it get out that the lead for one of the most iconic movie roles of all time is taking acting lessons.
Right, exactly.
That's a bad sign.
And this is another thing also. I don't understand why Disney paid so much money for the... I mean, you can slap Star Wars on anything and it's going to make $1 billion. So I get why they bought it from that perspective, but there's also a very passionate, rabid fan base that comes along with that. And I don't understand why you're going to spend all this money on this franchise with everything that could go along with that if you're just going to treat it like crap. And it's just going to be utterly chaotic.
I don't think they treated it like crap. I think they over-treated it. I think that's what happened. Is there was just too many cooks in the kitchen on this one,
yeah.
And they realized they had all this pressure on them. They realized what was at stake, and all the power players were in there trying to make Bob Iger happy. And I just think it just got away from them. I think that if they had to set up like if they let a different studio under the same Disney arm handle it, like in the olden days when they used to do Cocoon and all that sort of stuff. You know what I mean?
Like Buena Vista?
Yeah, Buena Vista, exactly. Thank you. When they would set up this like so-called independent studio within the same realm so they could do all their own stuff on their side, even with like what Pixar is in some ways, and just let them do what they want to do and not have people dropping in every 3 days to check in on what's going on. I think it would have been a lot better production, but I don't disagree with anything you said, really. I mean, I didn't dislike it as much as you did, but I didn't have as high hopes as you did.
Yeah, true. Well, I will say, right around the time The Rise of Skywalker came out, I can't remember where I saw it. It might have been on like BuzzFeed or something, but somebody posted on Reddit anonymously, and this person was clearly J.J. Abrams or J.J.'s wife or J.J.'s assistant or J.J.'s agent.
A. Jabrams or something like that?
Exactly. Or, his agent's assistant. It was somebody with a very low degree of separation from J.J. Abrams.
Wow.
And I clicked through and I read, like, at the time, like, it was like an 80-page thread. So God knows what it, got up to after that. But this person was just like, oh my God, you guys, like, JJ had so many great ideas for this movie, but like Bob Iger and Kathleen Kennedy, they were so upset about the fan backlash to The Last Jedi that JJ wasn't able to do like anything he wanted. Like, he filmed all these great scenes and, Bob Iger just like cut them from the final movie. And so, there's like a JJ edit out there. And, if you guys could just see it, you would know that it was like so awesome. And like JJ like really came through for you, but it was just like, Disney like totally like kept him down, man. And like half the people who commented on this thread were just like, release the JJ edit.
Yeah.
Like, they just bought it hook, line, and sinker. And then the other half were like, really? Like, look at JJ's track record. Like,
right.
No, there's no way, even if a director's cut does exist, that it can be that good.
Well, that's such an easy out too, right? Like, as any director can attest to that. It's like, if it's successful, they're like, this is my movie.
Right.
If it's not successful, they're like, oh, I had a different vision for this and it was not realized by the studio.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Really?
I mean, yeah, like I said, we've all seen his track record and we know that it's...
Well, J.J. Abrams, the brainchild behind Lost, right?
Lost, yeah, which people are still angry about, like
Right.
10 years later.
Right.
And every Star Trek fan I know is very upset about the way he's handled those movies. So.
Oh yeah, well Quentin Tarantino's doing the new Star Trek, so
So there's going to be a lot more F-bombs.
be careful what you wish for, Star Trekians.
I'm a effing doctor, Jim, not a effing cowboy or whatever.
Snakes on the Enterprise. I don't want no GD snakes on the Enterprise.
And somehow some N-words are going to get thrown around.
Oh,
and,
it's just going to be awful.
Yeah.
It's going to be awful.
We're going to have to watch that, but I think we're going to have to be pretty drunk to watch that.
Well, the last Quentin Tarantino movie that we watched that everybody loved, we did not like.
Yeah, that is true.
It might be one of those things where he just touches it and everybody loves it.
Although we did like Brad Pitt's performance in that, and he did win an Oscar. So
True.
We got something right. Like,
Well, and the Brad Pitt Oscar, not discounting his performance in that movie, but he's been better in other movies that he did not get an Oscar for.
This is Brad Pitt's in his 50s. It's time to give him an Oscar.
Yeah, exactly.
He's been around for 30 years, so
Yeah.
not discounting Brad Pitt as a producer or an actor, but you know, that's how it works. Everybody knows. That's why Leonardo DiCaprio got the Oscar for the movie he did and not something else.
That helps.
Yeah. So do you have any final words of wisdom on the Disney trilogy, aka the sequel trilogy?
As we are wrapping up all of these trilogies in this podcast, because we've now seen 9 movies, and
Thank God.
Who knows how many hours of time. I'm sure there's somewhere that we could add all that up, but it's more than 9 hours. Let me tell you, it's 9 movies. Yeah. So we're looking at probably 18 hours.
Well,
no, more than that, probably about 24 hours.
Yeah, because all of the prequels and sequels are like 2.5 hours each. And then I think the original trilogy is like in the 2 to 2.5 hour range as well. So yeah, we're probably looking at 22 to 24 hours.
The director is looking at me and saying, it's in your notes. I can tell by just the way he's looking at me. But it's like, okay, whatever. After having watched all those movies
in a very short amount of time,
which I don't think that's an unusual thing with this trilogy and within these pandemic times that we are in. But I would say that if you just watch the first 3, the original 3, the Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and then shut off Return of the Jedi before the victory dance by the Angry Bears at the end, I think that that's a pretty pleasurable experience, and you don't need to go any further. I would hazard a guess. If you want to go further and you go into the prequel trilogies, and this is my personal opinion, obviously, if you go into the prequel trilogies, just skip right over Phantom Menace, give a salute to Liam Neeson and say, sorry about that, and then watch the last 2, and then you can shut it down.
Yeah.
But if you're a fanboy and you want to see the characters, you want to see what the Force looks like in a generation after Leia and Skywalker, then you can watch the Disney sequels.
I wish Disney would just come out right now and say episodes 8 and 9 are being made non-canon and bring in like other people and be like, redo, we got a mulligan on these 2. Like, let's, now
that's a good idea.
Let's see if we can bring back like Daisy Ridley and John Boyega and Oscar Isaac and maybe Mark Hamill, like he'd probably be up for it. And let's just redo episodes 8 and 9. And these were like Kylo Ren's bad dream, like you said.
These were practice ones.
Pam Ewing wakes up and Bobby's in the shower. Like, let's, we're episodes 8 and 9 are non-canon and we're going to redo those.
Now, see, that would be interesting. And that would not be a surprise.
Yeah.
The things that happen in Hollywood, it would not be stunning. It'd be like, oh yeah, those didn't really happen. Here's really the 8 and 9 episodes.
Kathleen Kennedy, call us. We got ideas.
We got some script ideas for that one.
Yeah, we got ideas. And you can get a hold of us at cocoandalts at gmail.com. That's all one word. The and is spelled out. cocoandalts at gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at cocoandalts. You can also find us on our website, cocoandalts at gmail.com, which we're going through a redesign. So bear with us.
Are we really?
We're going to. I'm going to get around to that.
All right.
So in the next few weeks, be on the lookout for an all-new look.
And on the website, I should say, we also have book reviews and music reviews, too.
Yeah, so we do
in addition to video or podcasts and reviews of all the movies that we've watched.
And you can find our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, SoundCloud, TuneIn, Google Play, and YouTube. And we are soon to be on IMDb. We have submitted. We just need to get approved.
We're on there. We just need to improve what we've got on there.
We don't need to improve anything. We're perfectly imperfect.
We are what we are, as listener will attest, after 68 episodes.
68 episodes. Thank you for making it this far with us.
Yes, thank you very much if you actually listened all the way through to this episode as well.
Please give us some feedback. Send us an email. Even if you're not Kathleen Kennedy, slide into our DMs on Twitter and Facebook. Let us know what you think of the podcast, what you want to hear in the future, what you think of what we've done in the past. Also, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts.
And also coming soon to the podcast world of Cocoa Adults, a special Canada Day edition in which we talk about some of the finer moments that we've enjoyed of that country's culture in the last little while.
Because one of us is a bona fide Canadian.
And one of us wants to be a Canadian.
So for another episode, thank you for listening. I'm not Daltz.
And I'm not Coco.